Daniel Weaver had never believed in ghosts. Not in the way most people did. He didn't jump at shadows, didn't feel a chill down his spine in old houses. He was a man of logic, of simple explanations. That's why when his uncle died and left him the cabin in Alderwood, he didn't question it. He just packed up his things and drove 3 hours into the woods, thinking about renovations, plumbing, and how much peace he'd finally get after the mess of the last few years. The first thing he noticed when he arrived was the silence. The second was the lake. It stretched out behind the house like a black mirror, still and endless under the overcast sky. The trees bent toward it, their reflections eerily perfect in the glassy surface. It wasn't large, maybe a mile across, but something about it felt too deep, too dark, as if it went farther down than it should. The cabin itself was old but sturdy, its wooden walls weathered by time. Inside, dust blanketed every surface. The furniture was heavy, solid, and outdated, but Daniel liked that. It made the place feel untouched, preserved. The only thing he didn't like was the mirror. It stood in the bathroom, oval-shaped, framed in tarnished silver. Something about it made his stomach twist. The glass was slightly warped, as if it had seen too much and had never quite recovered. Daniel turned away, shaking off the unease. That first night, he slept fitfully, waking every few hours to an unfamiliar sound, a whisper, low and distant, curling at the edges of his mind. He told himself it was the wind. But the trees outside were still. The whispering followed him into the morning. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a voice speaking just beyond hearing. It rose and fell, shifting as he moved through the house, never quite gone. Daniel tried to ignore it. He focused on cleaning, unpacking, making the cabin livable. He took stock of the kitchen, found old canned goods in the pantry, dusted the bookshelves. But as the day wore on, he became aware of something else. His reflection was wrong. Not in a way he could explain. Not at first. It was just off. A fraction slower, a blink that lagged, a shift of the head that didn't match his own. He chalked it up to his imagination. Then, that night, as he lay in bed, the whispering returned. Closer. Clearer. This time, he understood the words. Let me in. Daniel's sleep turned restless. He dreamed of the lake. In the dream, he stood at its edge, the surface so smooth it looked unnatural. Then, a ripple. A shape moved beneath, stretching and shifting. Something looked up at him. He woke gasping. The whispering had stopped, but the air felt thick, wrong. The mirror stood across the room, uncovered. Daniel frowned. He was sure, absolutely sure, that he had draped a sheet over it before bed. And then, as he looked closer, his blood ran cold. His reflection wasn't moving. Daniel lifted a hand. His reflection did not. His breath hitched. Then, slowly, deliberately, his reflection smiled. Daniel lunged for the lamp, flooding the room with light. The reflection snapped back into place. Perfect. Normal. But the whispering was still there. Daniel avoided the mirror the next day. He kept himself busy. Cleaned. Took a walk. Read an old book he found on the shelf. But the feeling lingered, the sense of being watched, of something pressing against the edges of his vision. Then, just before sunset, something changed. He caught a glimpse of himself in the cabin window. Just a flash, a brief moment as he passed by. But in that brief second, his reflection wasn't alone. Something else stood behind him. Daniel spun, heart hammering. Nothing. Just the empty room. But the whispering started again. This time, it was coming from the mirror. Daniel wanted to leave. But he couldn't. He told himself it was paranoia, exhaustion. That it was just a mirror. That there was no one whispering, no one standing in his reflection but himself. But deep down, he knew better. That night, he dreamed again. He was at the lake. His reflection stood across the water, smiling. Almost ready, it whispered. Daniel jolted awake, his body ice cold. He forced himself to sit up, to breathe. To tell himself it wasn't real. Then he noticed something. The mirror was fogged over, as if someone had breathed on the glass from the inside. And written in the condensation, in long, spidery letters, were two words. Come closer. Daniel tried to destroy the mirror. He grabbed the heaviest thing he could find, a fire poker from the hearth, and swung. The mirror did not break. Not a single crack. Instead, the reflection inside shifted. Daniel stumbled back, breath coming too fast. The whispering rose, no longer distant but right behind his ear. And then, the reflection stepped forward. Out of the glass. Daniel couldn't move. His reflection, his other self, stretched, rolling its shoulders like someone waking from a long sleep. It was him, down to the last detail, but wrong. It grinned. You've been watching me for a long time, it said. Now it's my turn. Daniel tried to back away, but his legs felt weak, unsteady. The reflection tilted its head, then stepped forward. And Daniel fell. Not onto the floor. But into the mirror. Cold. Weightless. Daniel gasped, clawing at the glass. But it was solid now. A barrier. A prison. The world beyond the mirror looked the same, but muted. Slower. The reflection, his reflection, stood on the other side, stretching its fingers, getting used to its new skin. It met his eyes. Smirked. And turned away. Walking into Daniel's life. Daniel screamed. Pounded at the glass. But no one could hear him now. Because he wasn't real anymore. Not outside. Not himself. Just a whisper in the mirror.